pushed it because it was actually spring break week. And I just wanted to give you a little history of why I really felt called to do panels. I know in my own recovery, these issues that we mentioned have been huge. If I had not dealt with my unforgiveness, if I had not dealt with some of the other stuff that's coming up in the future months, my recovery would have been very short-lived. And I shared with somebody yesterday, when I entered recovery, I got rid of a substance. What I was not really prepared for was the stuff that was going to come out when I got rid of what I used to cope with. And so unforgiveness has been something that I'm not going to say I struggled with. I struggled with it because I didn't understand the process. And so I really wanted to bring this out. We brought up these people. We all have different stories. We're all somewhere along some recovery. We're not all from substance recovery, but I think we probably all know someone or are actually in recovery. So we're going to talk about unforgiveness tonight, and if y'all have any questions, I'm hoping to be done in time, because I think that this is something we need to continue to talk about with each other. I think we need to be open when we're struggling with these concepts, because like I said, the biggest part of why I had a hard time with forgiveness is because I was operating under some false beliefs about what forgiveness actually was. Okay, and so I had to have some training, and hopefully after we get done, somebody will walk away with a little more freedom, because truly the Bible says we have to forgive. Forgiveness is not an option according to the Bible. And I hope that they all talk about why that means. But if you would have told me that 3 years ago, just me saying that, I would have cringed and hated what you were saying, because it's that hard. Usually when you say forgiveness, like I said, it comes with some lies that are not actually part of what forgiveness is. And so I really do want to kind of hone in on that. But with that being said, I'm gonna apologize to my people. They are coming in really cold, so you're gonna get some probably honest reactions. I think that they're all a little nervous that it's gonna be too raw, but you guys, I know we're videoing this. This is not live. I really do hope we can put this on YouTube, because I think what's gonna come out is gonna be good. But I think the best thing about this is that we are raw, because we all need to know. Barry talked about it. We tend to put that mask on, and we don't talk about our real issues. We just come in, even here at the river. Sorry, I'm gonna out us. We come in at the river, even though this is the safest place, one of the safest places to be honest about what you're struggling with. But we'll come in and we'll put that mask on even here. I've done it. I did it like a champ. So anyway, with that, I'm gonna let you go ahead and introduce yourself, and maybe just tell us what it is that, some things that you had to forgive, and a little bit about your story.
My name's Marie Davis, and we could go way back and have lots of things we need to forgive, and or had to forgive ourselves, and that's something too. God forgives us, we forgive ourselves. But along through the years, forgiving things and people, and even what I've done along the way, prepared you for, I don't know what to say, prepare. But the worst for me was my daughter was murdered in 2003, and I had, it was hard, and it wasn't overnight, and it was a process of just being a child of God. I praise God that I was saved and I had Him with me, and it was hard. But I knew in my mind, in my heart, that I was to forgive, and it was constantly there. But then, people that love me, my family, my friends, were like, God doesn't expect you to forgive a murderer. He understands, but He does. He loves that person too. And I'm sorry, what He did, sin had taken him over, evil had taken him over. And the more I prayed and stayed with God, and I think that's the main important, whatever we're going through and whatever we're having to forgive, we've got to stay with Him. Just keep praying and asking Him. That's what I did. And I I learned that it's a choice. It's fine.
Okay.
Like I said, it went overnight. In my heart and in my mind, I knew I had to just keep asking God to forgive what happened to Mandy. Have your help, God. And so I just kept praying. I read everything I could, scriptures on forgiveness. And like I said, it wasn't overnight. And just kept praying those scriptures and claiming the scriptures on forgiveness. And I found myself once, I'm going to go back and I don't know, a year maybe or so, because it was the year after Mandy had been murdered that we had the trial and he was sent to prison. But I found myself kind of getting away from prayer, because when I got in prayer, I found myself not wanting to pray because the person that murdered my daughter's name kept coming to my mind, and I didn't want to pray for him because some of my children were saying, "Well, Mom, he doesn't deserve to be in heaven," and that just bared on me so hard, and I thought, yes, he does. But that's not me. That was God. I know He was speaking to me, telling me, but it was like, pray for him. But I kind of got away from wanting to pray. And then one day when I was on my knees praying for God to help me, I found myself praying for him without even thinking about it. So that was God. But that wasn't overnight. That was the process of me asking God and staying with him and, asking him to help me to pray for that.
And help me remember, I want to come back to that point, okay? I want to share that with you, but before we go any further, I want you guys, and I'm going to start asking y'all questions, because you brought up a lot of things. I think we need to unpack your story a little bit. I know you guys, and I love you guys, but introduce yourself and kind of tell, a little bit about your story, and then we're going to start unpacking.
I'm Sydney Tucker,
And I'm Nikki Tucker.
and we've been through a lot the last 5 years in our journey in recovering from a divorce from each other, infidelity, pornography, a very large change in our life. Bitterness from unforgiveness really killed our relationship, and it took a lot of learning on what forgiveness was to really get through that and go closer to each other and God at the same time.
But the end of that story is what?
And it worked out.
It worked out. They're back together.
Yes.
And that's all I'm going to say about that. So that, I want us to go, I will say, I've had, for the better part of the last 18 months, I've learned, I'm 42, I was raised with lots of trauma, lots of family issues, dysfunctional issues. I had trauma as a young adult and trauma into my adult years. So my forgiveness really spans over the course, I say, of 42 years. And I was thinking about that today. I've had to learn to have a life of forgiveness. I did not know how to forgive well, so I stuffed well. And I had lots of bitterness in me because I just didn't know how to get it out. And that, honestly, I think that it changed my personality. I've got a strong personality anyway. I don't apologize for that, but it did make it to where I was harsher. I was angry. I say bitter, but it's all of that was stemming from just unresolved issues and not forgiving. So that's kind of where I'll be coming from, and it's still for me. My next question would be, you kind of said it. It was a while. It was a process. I want to read this. I know that you have a book. Do you want to share your book yet?
I can't.
Just the title? Yeah, because I brought a book too.
Well, I read, like I said, everything, even a grief. through having forgiveness. But some friends of mine got together. I know it's probably backwards on the thing, but it's Total Forgiveness Experience by R.T. Kendall. And it's a great book, and I also have a little workbook with it. But some friends of mine got together. It was after the trial, so it was over a year. But they got together and we met, and we went through this. And I praise God and thank God for wonderful friends that wanted to help me, through what I was going through. So they got together this forgiveness study, and it's a really good book. It really helped me, and plus the time I had with the few people that got together to do this. But it's a good.
So you
Good
studied.
read.
I actually did another 18 months ago. I was in with a marriage counselor, and he recommended a book that I didn't bring, and that's what started my journey. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looked like for me in a minute, but the last 6 months I've done it's a new one. It's pretty new, the Lisa Turkhurst book. If y'all don't know anything about her, her husband, she's been a big Christian writer for years and years and years, and this is public knowledge, I'm not sharing, but her husband had an affair, and she has written several books while she was trying to cope with that and lots of stuff. But this is her latest book called Forgiving What You Can't Forget, and I did want to read this because you guys are saying that. In her book, she said, forgiveness is both a decision and a process. So I was going to ask that. We were talking briefly. For me, the process is ongoing. And part of it is because this is one misconception that I had. I forgave the event. Nobody told me you have to forgive the fallout, okay? And she actually writes that. She says every trauma has an initial effect and a long-term impact. So even if you can forgive that one instance, right? If it's sexual aggression, or if it's the infidelity, or if it's abuse in the home, or if it's the taking of a life, nobody said that first Christmas how mad you get. And I think that's what sometimes we don't realize, is that when people were talking to me about forgiveness, they would say things like, well, if you had truly forgiven, then you would just move on. That was not my experience, because I continue to have to deal with new issues that would come up from that, if that makes any sense. Now, I'm not a licensed professional counselor. I'm going to say that none of us are. But these are the things that on the day that I would experience in that, I would have to go back through my forgiveness. And to me, so this is my follow-up question to you guys. To me, forgiveness biblically says I have to release you from the debt. It doesn't say it didn't happen. It doesn't say it didn't impact me in a negative way. It says that I'm going to let that go back to God. Okay, the scripture says God will have his vengeance. Now, that whatever that means, but that's between that person and God. And when you forgive somebody, really what you're saying is, God, I'm going to give this person back to you, and I'm going to let you deal with that. Now, this is Stacy speaking here, and I say this from my own personal experience. My own sins in my life have caused me to do things that are not like me, that are not the way that I'm created to be. And God had to deal with my heart on that. Now, the thing about it is, God is full of grace and mercy, okay? We live in a fallen world. We live in a sinful world. We all fall short. We all are going to sin. And we're going to talk about this at the very end. God forgives us, right? And I don't know if you ever said this, but somebody says you need to forgive like God, and my reaction was, well, I ain't God. I ain't doing that. I ain't God. But you know what I could do? I could give them back to God. I couldn't. For me to find that forgiveness was a difficult process, but for me to say, God, I can't do this. I can't. But I'm going to give it back to you, and I'm going to let it go now that I can do. So my question for you guys is, what did your process, is it ongoing? Is it something that you still struggle with at times? Do you find yourself, like I said, it's just that rare occasion when you think, man, I wish that that wouldn't have happened, or I wish that I didn't have to live with this burden, and you kind of find yourself getting angry again, and you have to work through it. I mean, that's been my experience, but what's y'all's
Well, I
experience
mean,
been?
that does happen, I mean, cause you can forgive somebody and choose to forgive them every day, but eventually, something's going to trigger that thought in your head to come back, and you're gonna feel all those emotions again, just like it happened right then, you know? And then you got to say to yourself, you know,
And then
I
it's
forgive
almost
them.
like dealing with it all
Right.
over again because you're having to, we actually had this happen recent. I mean, I would say that our forgiveness process is healed, but every now and then the devil's gonna be like, hey, you remember,
Yep.
you know, she done this one time and she acted a certain type of way.
Some-
She's kinda
say
acting funny
something
today.
or do something that might trigger a memory
Mhm.
of, you know, they used to do that when, you know, something's going on.
Right, so what you been
You know,
doing,
like, hey,
you know?
what's going on, you know?
Yeah,
And then you gotta check yourself, you know,
Right.
like, what, I forgave that, I'm choosing to forgive, I'm gonna keep choosing to forgive.
And then my end of that is reassurance for him is huge. Like I had to stop and take a moment with him and really try to reassure him that we don't have those problems anymore and that we are healed and that,
Oh, yeah, that was just the other day,
yeah.
I had them all the
Just
other day.
that other day.
but I think that's for couples, okay? In my situation, okay. For couples, I think that's a beautiful example of that there may be moments when you're dealing with some old issues, you work through your process, your job is to forgive, and you did a beautiful thing by giving reassurance, and I think that's a good thing to point out here, because that is the way, if you look at the biblical example of that, we go to our Heavenly Father and we ask for forgiveness, He immediately extends grace and mercy,
Right.
and that is what you did, you extended grace, you didn't say, why do you guys bring this up again? Did we? I mean, maybe you did.
No.
Okay, maybe you did, but right now
It
y'all want
actually
to
didn't
know.
happen that way.
But you understood that we all are going to struggle with this concept at times. You took control of it, you owned your part, and you gave your assurance. So I just wanted to point that out, that in a couple, where you're dealing with some broken trust, and I'm sorry if you're married, I don't care if you've had the picture perfect marriage or if you've struggled with some serious trust issues, those things come in play.
Oh, yeah, and also, like, before we got through this process, you know, years ago, I would, you know, I didn't really understand how forgiveness worked, you know, I just thought it was some little feeling, you feel, oh, I feel like I forgive them, so it's not how it works. But, I would say, you know, I forgive you, and I really didn't forgive you. So, what that did to me is made me hold it in, just build it up. Now I became very mean. I would be real snarky and smart aleck and say a lot of things that I didn't really mean, just out of, you know, me in my own mind, thinking of, you know, how could you know, not really forgiving. I didn't release any of that stuff. I just held it in. I never let go of it.
And he just said, I forgive you. So
Yeah.
in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I don't know how deep or shallow this forgiveness is. So I'm thinking he forgives me. And I'm
And
like,
it-
okay, so we're
it
fine. But then
caused-
he starts acting,
Even more.
you know, mean and snarky. So I'm like, okay, wait a minute.
I know I can pick on Sid,
Yeah,
but I'm telling you, I feel it right here. I think so many people do not always equate anger with unforgiveness. Maybe
Oh,
y'all
yeah.
do. Maybe, I don't know out there. But I know in particular, I think it may manifest different, but you pointed out that you got very angry,
Yes.
would like have fits of rage. Like,
rage.
just something simple, and I would just blow up. You know, it's all stem back from that.
And I'm not gonna, because women blow up too. I mean, women, I'm sorry, I'm gonna speak for the women here. We do our own things, okay? But I think for people that struggle with anger and rage, understanding that the root of that is unforgiveness and bitterness. Bitterness comes from unforgiveness, okay? It's like, in the first study I did, there's like a pathway that you follow. You have the trauma, And then at that moment, I'm gonna tell you kind of the diagram of how this works. You have a trauma, or you have something that breaks your trust, or there's a hurt, there's a pain. At that moment, you decide, what am I gonna do with this? If you don't deal with it appropriately, it will go into unforgiveness. And if that continues to go on, it gets into bitterness, which then the Bible calls it a root. Okay, so think about a tree. The longer that you hold that unforgiveness, the more deeply rooted that gets into your system, and it will invade everything that you do. And you described that at that point, you had a root of bitterness. And so I think that is where, if you want to trace back a lot of why we end up in rehab, why we're doing our coping techniques, why we have anger issues, why there's, and I'm going to put this, why there's domestic abuse in a home, it all, if you'll trace it back, it all goes to this one topic, is why we really are putting this out there. You guys, y'all might not say anything to me, but I know what we deal with because I lived it. And so I'm just, and y'all are up here too, we're trying to pull the mask off and say, you gotta deal with unforgiveness, okay? And so, with that being said, I would follow through. What was your process? Did you have to go through a process? Was it just time? Did you journal? Did you talk? I mean, what were some of the steps that you did to kind of help with that unforgiveness?
I think I was all over the place, really. I studied God's Word a lot, and I prayed. Not so much a process, maybe it was time, but the times that I felt, talking about stuffing it in, I'm bad about doing that too, before that happened with Mandy. And I had someone tell me, Maria, I don't think you are forgiving or you've forgiven, I think you're just not dealing with it. Well then, I was like, oh my goodness. Then I started praying, okay, Lord, if it's in me, I want it out, because I didn't want the forgiveness and revenge, because someone in our family was dealing with that, with the bitterness and the revenge part, and was destroying that person. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, and then praying for the kids and all of that. So I think it was time, but it was to keep asking. Not to let a day, a minute go by. And I read one time, it's like, it's like, I don't know, I'm probably gonna ramble, so get me on track. But the time with that was, not wanting to be around people, or not to hear chatter, the laughter, not ever thinking I'm gonna laugh again, or have anything, because it changed me too. I'm not
Things
who
like
I
that
was.
would make you irritable.
Mhm.
Did seeing people
But I don't know
happy
that I
make
was
you angry?
irritable. I was just kind of, I don't know.
Empty.
But the first year, because we had to, go through all the stuff that you go through before a trial, all the evidence and all this, and her getting her dental records, and her dad and I going and having blood drawn. I mean, it was just like, because Mandy was missing. Let me back up a little bit. No, most people know, but Mandy was missing for 8 days, and she was found, and she had been murdered. And there were several things that had happened to her, and so for me, get me on track.
Okay.
I wanted to concentrate on what happened to her, and so that was like eating me up, because all I could think about was what had happened to her, and I would want to vision it, and I would watch movies. I never watched horror movies, so I started watching movies and trying to find things that would, I want to be as close to what happened to her, and I know you as a parent can understand. I wanted to know, and I wanted to hurt. I wanted to feel what she felt. So that was kind of consuming me. And so I thought one night, God, I could just feel him saying, you've got to stop this. It's not doing you any good. That's not healing. You're praying and asking me to help, but you've got to stop this. And so I was constantly going to the DA's office. I was constantly, this and that, trying to, whatever I heard, just to tell. So, I had to back off. God was telling me, I gotta chill and gotta back off, you know, and I just kept asking him to help me to do what I needed to do. I didn't wanna be bitter, didn't wanna revenge. I knew I needed to pray for him. And you know, it's not actually for that person that did the hurt or the wrong, it's more for you.
Yeah, forgiveness is.
And the peace, though, that I found through all of that is still beyond my understanding when I think back, and how I can even go back, and it hurts. It's gonna always hurt. I'm not gonna forget it. But I read somewhere too that in praying, someone had wrote, the sting of the hurt kind of leaves. I don't know in our situation, it's, you learn to, it doesn't, I don't know, it hurts, and I will never forget it, and things trigger sometimes every day, and sometimes I cry, but I do go for days, you know, that I don't cry, but then there may be a couple of days that's all I do, but I know who to go to, and that keeps me from getting bitter. So as soon as I, back a few years ago, over the years, it was as soon as something would come or something would trigger, I would immediately start just asking God to help me, and just to take it away, and you know, He does. But you know, I think it's all those times that were bad, and they keep asking and never ever give up, and just keep relying on God, makes us stronger and stronger and stronger. But the peace, and if you've ever went there and had that peace through anything that you've been through, it's awesome in it, the peace of God.
Can I ask you this follow-up question? I think that sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have it done right away. And I wanted to ask you that question, is that when you're in, like right after something that traumatic has happened, you're in such intense pain. What I hear you saying is you kept petitioning God, help me. And I think that that is important, that we keep going to Him and asking Him to heal our wounds and heal our heart. And I know that you kept doing that, but if you were to talk to yourself those early days, would you say be kind to yourself, or is there anything you would have?
You know, in the beginning, I don't even know that I was thinking. It was, I guess, unbelief, you know, shock of what had happened, especially that first year. And the first year kept it real fresh, because we were constantly being called or told something, or, you know, so it just kept it real fresh. And so after the trial and the man was sentenced, well, it seems like it was all over. It's like we were beginning to have closure. And
Yeah, so, and, yeah.
But I just, yeah, it wasn't, I don't know, it's not, all I knew was, sometimes all I could say was Jesus. And I say all the time, you know, there's power in His name. Such wonderful power in His name, because sometimes all I could think, and sometimes I couldn't even say it, I would just think it. Even if I couldn't pray, if I got in bed or whatever, I would just sleep with my Bible like if it was a stuffed animal of a kid. So I would just hold it, you know.
So you just really kept yourself very close to that. Yeah. And it took time. That's what I mean. It just took time. I want to ask you guys the same question. Did y'all feel the pressure to like get through the process fast, try to get it behind you, and did that really work, or did it just take the time that it took?
I wouldn't necessarily say felt pressure to, you know, try to hurry anything along. And it was, you know, the process is a little frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Say
it again.
It's a little frustrating.
It's frustrating.
Why
would
you want it to hurry up, but then at the same time you're like, but we want to work through this the right way and not rush anything. Because if you rush through it and don't do it right, and don't really get your peace and really forgive, then you end up right back where you were.
And if you don't have to work hard for it, it's just like with anything else. If God just gave us everything like this, we'd be like, okay, well, He just does it for anybody anytime. When you have to work hard for it, it makes you appreciate it more and know how to go forward when you have a problem.
I mean, was there ever a time when y'all looked at you and said, can we just move on from this? Or were y'all always pretty patient?
I would say, you know, in the moment, in the process, I don't feel like neither of us try to rush anything.
So you let everybody, which I'm making that point because I think a lot of times, and
Maybe
I've heard
moments, and you know, like I wish this would be over with.
Or like he might say something, I'll be like, my God.
Yeah,
we just
you know,
gotta-
but like as far as the whole the outlook of the whole process,
Yeah.
I don't feel like we were, you know, rushing to try to get through it.
And I think in your case, being kind to yourself and giving you that time to process it. I think in y'all's case, giving each other the time to process it. I'm gonna say though, for those of us that have not experienced that as much, there is a frustration when the person who you are trying to forgive is almost demanding forgiveness. So I can say that is that, and I have to be honest. There's times when I want to demand forgiveness. I'm like, just let me move on.
Or
Okay?
it can be frustrating if they got a wall that's 70 foot tall.
And that
it's
does happen.
25 foot deep.
Yes.
You know, and you're
So-
trying to get over or through the wall, and it's not working.
So what did you do? Because I know y'all's story. I know that happened.
Yeah.
So what did you do?
I just stayed consistent.
Did you push a little?
I might have used a sledgehammer a few times.
I'd say overall patient and just
Yeah,
waited,
and I
waited for signs of me to maybe be ready to.
you know, and in our situation, what I really did is I fasted and prayed and asked God to help me. I said, to show me what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you gotta slap me in the face and to show me something, do it.
Right.
You know, and I just kind of followed along, and you know, he right there at the, not very far along into the process. I mean, he kind of revealed to me that everything's gonna be okay. It's gonna take time.
Were you ever frustrated with the waiting though?
Maybe
I
a
feel
little
like
bit.
you were, because
Yeah.
there were days.
There
that
were
I was-
times when I was like, you know, I'm doing a lot here, and you're not really getting.
And I'm being
anything back, you know.
witchy, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's for life. Y'all are being
Yes.
so real because
Yeah.
that is the way. And if you've ever done steps, one of the steps is to make amends. But how many of us, first of all, to go and make that amend is hard in itself, but when it is not well received, that is something that we have to deal with. So when we're talking about forgiveness, you have to, whether you're on the receiving end or if you're asking for forgiveness, there's challenges on both sides. And y'all y'all are an example of that, in that if that person's not ready to receive that, we have to allow them that time and pray. You know, God, I'll be honest with you. For me to truly forgive that person who did harm against me, God had to move on my heart. It's been me, like you said, me and God sitting there and saying, God, please help me to get to that point. And anything beyond that, it didn't matter who said, well, you need to do this faster. That tended to slow me down. So if I felt the pressure to get there, I couldn't put the work into what me and God needed to do, if that makes sense. I will say this though, and if y'all, I'm gonna ask this of the audience. When I really started my forgiveness process, I started writing in a journal about like this. And that is what, in her book, she recommends. You write down everything that ever hurts you. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Just to get to that point is difficult. I'm not going to lie to you. If you are honest about everything that has been stolen from you, everything that, and this is it, y'all, people, we live in a fallen world, and yes, people do the action, but it's because of the enemy that we fight against. God created all of us. He did, with a purpose. But we have a choice. I've done things in my own past that I would be embarrassed to say I've done in front of y'all. I know that we are all able to say, gosh, I wish I could take that one back. But when I write down everything, I wrote down everything that ever happened that I could remember. And then when I got done, I said, God, reveal to me everything I've forgotten. I'm still not through that, because then at that point I said, I don't want to remember anymore. So let's stop this process. But I did write it all down. I don't know where that notebook is right now, to be honest with you. I had to let it go, because when I wrote it, as I wrote it, I let it go. And I'm going to tell you something, that was very cleansing for me. I was able to let that go.
Well, that's kinda almost like going to counseling, like you
Yeah.
sit there and physically speak out your problems.
Right.
And that kinda releases you a little. It kinda works the same way, cause you physically, from brain to hand, letting this piece of paper have it, like, this is how I feel.
Yeah.
It's that to me.
Well,
So
and
that's like
yeah.
it kinda works the same way as a release, as like, this paper's taken on my back.
Yeah.
You know.
And I will say for me, writing it was a little easier because I wrote things I would never want to say out loud.
I did too, journaling was good. I did that, I had started journaling a long time before Mandy, passed, and, I'm just gonna say through a difficult marriage, and it's just gonna, I think through the things that I went through before she passed, got me so much closer to the Lord, and, I just know it did. Cause I was a Christian, saved and prayed and read my, and studied His Word. But during some times, of course, when we're going through times, we're gonna go to Him more. But I wanted to back up and say too, I haven't told this hardly at all. Like I said, we journal a lot. I journaled a lot and wrote a lot of stuff in there, and I don't know. I just feel I should share this. That it's really hard to share it. You shouldn't want to share stuff about yourself. But as I say, I did pray to God. There were hard times. I also felt that if something happened to me, you're still the mother or parent or whatever. What's going to happen to my kids, my husband, my mama, my daddy? All of them that love Mandy and were hurting and having to deal with this too. And so I'm trying to help everybody else. But then, I couldn't even help my daughter. I couldn't even save her. I was gone that day to Meridian to a doctor's appointment, so I didn't get home till later. And so anyway, I wanted to back up and say, there were a few times I struggled with some stuff, and even though I was praying and asking God, a sister-in-law came and she wanted to take me for a ride in an open Jeep, and Satan can play minds. He can play so many tricks on your mind. I mean, just like that, And we're riding, and it was me and a daughter of mine and my sister. Somebody else, it's 4 of us, and I was in the front with her, and she just wanted to take me for a ride to get me away. It was the very next weekend, or 2 weekends after Mandy died, and as I sat there, I started hearing, the roaring of a Jeep, and it was like, just jump, you can do it, God will forgive you. You won't have to deal with this, He'll, God's gonna understand if you jump from this Jeep. It'll all be over, and you'll be with Mandy, living with Him. But as that did that, and they're all chattering in the Jeep, they never knew it for a long time. I never told it to my kids, and it was, I started in my mind, in my heart, asking God to forgive me for even having that thought, for even allowing that to come through. But I saw how fast something like that can come in your mind, and if you act on it, it's scary. And but immediately that God was there, and He would, it's like I was asking Him to forgive me for that, and I was so scared that I knew I had to just keep praying. I had to pray, and I couldn't let up. Every second.
And a lot of people, I want to say this, I don't know if you would call it mentally strong or religiously strong or what, but a lot of people would have just believed that to have been true and just said, well, I'm just gonna jump.
Exactly. That's what scared me.
And
Just
not
like that.
stopped and said,
And I felt like
no.
I was really close to the Lord, and for that to be in my head, and it was like, it actually happened twice with me again. And I thought, Satan is really, that verse, he's out there to kill, steal, and destroy us. And we've got to stay close to God.
The religious people would have said, well, God took her home.
Yeah.
She can,
Is there anybody in the audience that has found a tool or something they used in their forgiveness journey that was helpful for them? We mentioned counseling. Barry has, we have that here. We have mentorship here. Now, understand that that's really us sharing our experience. That's your testimony. We do that plenty. I've journaled. But anybody else? Because I know that we're all struggling. I just think that if you're breathing, you're gonna have to forgive, okay?
Yeah.
It's just the way it goes.
Lisa, I have a couple of questions, like when we finish them.
Okay.
You may or may not have addressed.
I wanna bring up two more things, but one more thing in particular. I wanna address the issue of forgiving yourself. Out of all of the things that I struggle with, I'll be honest with you, I haven't even started dealing with that personally. I get very angry with myself about a lot of things. But I wanted to open that up for y'all to kind of give your, that's my honest opinion. I know God has really been dealing with me personally the last probably month that I'm gonna have to start that journey real quick. But, I'm just being honest, I'm not ready for it. But for some reason, I know the truth is that God forgives me, grace and mercy, and I need to write, actually, one of the people that do mentor here, she wrote on one of my journals, she wrote really big, you need to give yourself grace. I found it easier to give others grace and not myself, so I don't know if y'all wanna speak to that real briefly, then we'll let Barry close us out.
I don't know, for me, like, I have to say our whole forgiveness and healing process happened fairly quickly, maybe as in comparison to other people. Like when it started and then compared to where we are now, how long would you say that was?
From then to now,
Yeah.
2.5 years.
It don't seem like that long.
Been 3. That's good.
But as far as like from when we were like, okay, we're better, this is gonna be okay, but still was having to deal with it, it was pretty quick. And I know forgiving myself was a big thing. And I feel like I'm healed from that. I feel like I have forgiven myself, but every now and then you're
Well,
gonna have a
it's,
really bad day and you're like, all you can think to yourself, and I know it's the devil, is you were such a horrible person for doing that thing that you did. Don't you remember all those things you done? You know, and then I'm like, no, not today.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it works the same way, just like you remember what someone else done to you. You remember, how could I have done these things to that person? It works the same way. I mean, you got to keep, no, God forgave me for that. That's no longer part of who I am anymore. Like I moved past that. I'm forgiven. Let's move on. I can tell this story and it maybe help somebody else.
Right.
And
I'm
then
not gonna let it
affirmation,
affect me.
affirmation from other people too helps. I know sometimes I'll say things out loud like, and I'm not a real social friendly person, but affirmation from other people when I say things out loud like, I just can't believe I did that. Him or my mama or a friend will say, but you're not anymore. You don't do that anymore. That kind of helps me feel a little better.
So what I heard, the takeaway I heard from you is that we do need to verbalize when we're struggling in our head.
Yes.
This is what I'm struggling with. And I agree, because somebody else, y'all know this, you get in your own head, man, you'll convince yourself of just about
Oh,
anything.
yeah.
Yes.
Ain't no doubt.
So, and we talk about that a lot here. That is a struggle, not only for you, but for many of us in recovery. We struggle to get that out of our mouth. So
I have found a lot of healing in that. Being able, even if it's to him, going and being like, I'm really struggling with these thoughts today, and this is what I'm thinking, and he'll say, something that helps.
And I'm gonna say this just came up. Y'all worked really. I know. I know y'all did some counseling.
Yes.
Y'all did lots of prayer. You're active in your church, and I know that y'all have a good support system outside of that. But I would strongly encourage anybody that's struggling with this, especially when it's between a relationship where you're trying to restore. We didn't get into this, but there are times, I want to say this briefly. Forgiveness does not automatically mean reconciliation.
No.
There are some things that you have to look at. Are you safe within the relationship? Is it a healthy relationship? And if it's not, then you're gonna have to work on those issues. When y'all started rebuilding trust, when y'all started working together, because I know your story, y'all are both understanding that it had to be different this time. I've heard your testimonies. And so I think that's something we have to understand. That was a misconception that I had, is that if you offered forgiveness, and why I probably did not offer forgiveness for a very long time, that meant that I had to go back in and just let you have free reign to everything about me. There's no boundaries, there's no nothing. And I'm saying, if any of, Lisa, any of these, you have to have good boundaries. If it was poor boundaries to begin with, you gotta set some boundaries up before you really can start building trust. So forgiveness, reconciliation, and trust, they're not the same thing. They're all three different processes, and so they are gonna look different, but.
You can forgive someone and never see them again.
Well, and I can say something about that. I grew up in an abusive home, and once, because I'm just sitting here thinking, unforgiveness has eaten so at me, and I think it bled over to my relationship with him. I mean, even my mother, I would say, how can you forgive him and what he did? And he really didn't like me. He died in October, and I really had not talked to him. And my brother called me and he said, you gotta talk to him. And I don't think that I really actually forgave him until my sister put the phone up to his ear, and I could hear him breathing, and I finally said, I forgive you for what you did to me, you know, and it was, but I lived in unforgiveness for, oh gosh, forever, which led over to my marriage, to my children, you know, and I did what you said. I just blocked it out. Well, then everybody knows her story. I was unfaithful. And then all these things started coming back into my head and even today, I'll call my mom and I'll say, do you remember that time we had to run? And she's like, golly, how do you remember that? But unforgiveness, it's like having demons in you, and it bleeds through everything.
So I will say, you guys, we have just scratched the surface, and I'm going to encourage you guys, especially you guys sitting in this room and I'm looking at you, get some help. Find somebody that's maybe started their forgiveness process that can talk to you about that, can listen to what you're having to go through. I say this, you'll know somebody that's gone through the forgiveness process because their mentality about it is just different. That doesn't mean they're all the way through it. I'm telling you, there's still things that come up and I get furious again. But God is really, when I say He's made me have a life of forgiveness, because there's always something happening, you guys. And I've learned the quicker I can deal with it, the less of that, I don't have to carry that like 1,000-pound elephant on my chest all the time. And so I'll try my best. And sometimes, you guys, it takes days and weeks to forgive something, but I do eventually, I'm getting there. I'm winning that battle, okay? I'm not gonna say I'm always good at it, but I'm winning that battle where it used to completely kick my behind. So, Barry, did you have any other questions?
Yeah, Kathy, I believe I just heard the Lord say that He redeemed that situation, your dad. I don't know if you covered this, but I want to thank y'all first. Stacy, thank you for the foresight. I want to thank you all, the panel, all four of you, for turning your scars into stars tonight. Did you talk about forgiving and forgetting, the erroneous notion of forgetting?
It was on my
Did you
list.
touch that?
Well, that is a notion. Society says forgive and forget. As a matter of fact, I think that's what most people think forgiveness is that once you give it, don't ever talk about it again. We're done. Don't talk about that. I've even had, I can't tell you, that is false, okay? And I want to read this from Lisa, okay? This ain't Stacy, because I'm not. This is what Lisa says. The decision to forgive does not fix all the damaged emotions. It does not automatically remove the anger, frustration, doubt, damaged trust, or fear. And that's why I said forgiveness can be instantaneous, but building trust and building relationship and reconciliation, that is a process that takes time. So, you know,
Well, you could almost say, like, once you've made the decision that you're going to forgive them, that's when you start the process.
And forgiveness is like love. It's not a feeling, it's a choice that you make every day, I feel like.
Yeah.
Especially if it keeps.
So I'm just going to say this. If you're in the process that you need to be forgiven, please don't look at that person and say, we're gonna say this one time and then we're done,
Right.
okay? Just
That's not
trust
how it
me on
works.
that, that's not the way it works, unless they're like really, unless they are Jesus, okay? But yeah, so,
I think some frustrated Bible teachers one time got it mixed up when they read that God removes our sins as far away from us as the east is from the west and remembers them no more. Well, it's not because he don't have the ability to remember them no more. He does. He just chooses not to. So, and I think that, yeah, right. And the other thing too is I think it's important to know, and you might have touched this too, that when you don't forgive, and Jesus said it twice in the Gospels, I know that if you don't forgive your brother, you know, God's not going to forgive you. It's important to know when you don't forgive, you sever your source of blessings from God. You completely sever that. And Jesus was clear about that. So those are just 2 points I wanted to make there. Again, thank you, everybody, and thank you all for coming tonight. Please join us here in about 5 minutes for Life at the River. Jeff will be our host tonight. Savannah will be our guest tonight. Savannah, we're looking forward to hearing all the wisdom that's going to come out of you, especially since you started nursing school, all right?